The story begins at a magical academy where our protagonist named Serfort, who has no aptitude for magic, but since he lacks any form of magic, he makes up for it by using the sword to strike down his enemies. One day in class, Professor Edward is giving a lesson on how people can produce fire with the aid of catalysts and some magic, but all the students in class you could choose from, he decides to call on Vil to demonstrate the experiment, knowing he's unable to use magic. He does this because he's a high-level hater, but Vil has no choice but to obey his orders, so he walks up to the front of the class and begins trying to make the spell work, but predictably, nothing happens, so the whole class wastes no time in mocking him for his repeated failures. Edward tells them all to calm down. That's just because he wants to personally roast Vil for being incapable of such a rudimentary spell. Vil excels at magical theory, but he has no magical talent whatsoever, so Edward despises him for thinking he can attend magic school without any magic. One student in his class casts the fire spell for his seat to ignite the catalyst in front of Will, and while Edward isn't concerned for Will's safety at all, it would still be bad for his record if his student burned to death, so he asked Shounen to refrain from doing reckless things like that in the future. Shounen apologizes and says he was just trying to help a little since Vil obviously isn't going to be able to do the demonstration, but with that said, Edward concludes the experiment and begins a speech about how magic is supreme in this world, so people who have no talent for have no right to exist in this magic academy, and all this is said while making direct eye contact with Will. After class, Vil feels exhausted from all the hate he was getting, but people love hating on him, so Shounen follows him out of class to continue messing with Will. Luckily, there is still some people who are on Vil's side as Colette comes running to his defense. Shounen asks why Colette is defending Vil when she's an honor student and Vil is half a point away from dropping out of school, but she says that doesn't matter since Vil is the nicest person she's ever met and he works much harder than any of them ever have. Shounen is stunned for a moment, but then he begins laughing since no matter how kind or hardworking Vil is, it won't change the fact that he can't use magic, and Vil is certainly never going to become Magia Vander without magic. Shounen and his friends leave Vil alone for now after that, so while locking together, Colette tells Vil not to be bothered by what Shounen and Professor Edward were saying since they just did it to humiliate him, and Vil says it's fine since he really isn't able to use magic, and besides, he considers himself lucky since their hating made a cute girl like Colette want to hang out with him. Colette gets embarrassed when he says this, so she tells Vil that flattery isn't going to make her want to go out with him, but Vil says he was just stating a fact since he thinks Colette is really cute. This gets Colette even more embarrassed and she nearly falls for Vil in the spot, so she pushes him away for a bit so she can think clearly and remain calm. She's technically a noble, so she can't let herself fall in love so easily. After regaining her composure, she looks over to Vil, but he is busy looking at the sky since it is especially beautiful today. Long ago, the people of this world lived in a constant shroud of darkness, in fear of the celestial host who ruled over them. However, that all changed when the 5 wizards against them joined forces to oppose the celestial and bring the light of the sky to everyone. These wizards tend to be known as the Magia Vander, and they are regarded as the epitome of magic, so no mages alive to date have ever been able to live up to the title. Colette wonders if the Ice Maiden Albizvina is washing over them right now, and Vil says he's sure she is because he knows for a fact that she is looking at them right now from her window at the top of the world. Back when Vil was younger, he had a childhood friend called Elfaria, and she would tell him all about the sun and moon she read about at Sarah books. She was especially excited to see the sunset since it is supposedly really pretty, so she hoped they could become Magia Vanders together someday and see the sun together. Vil promised to become a Magia Vander with her, but while it may have just been a promise between children, Elfaria actually worked hard to make it happen, and soon enough, she had climbed to the top of the towers through all her hard work. In contrast, Vil had no talent at all to keep his promise, yet he is still trying his best to make it up the tower even if it is just a delusional dream. However, even with his rock-solid resolve, it doesn't stop him from crumbling like a cookie when he gets scolded. Vil asks Professor Werkner to calm down a bit, but Werkner is rightfully angry since Vil went into the dungeon again despite knowing how dangerous it was, and all the way down to the 7th floor too. He's worrying Vil will end up getting himself killed at this rate, so Vil begs him for forgiveness, but he also asks if he can get his extra credit now. Werkner is still mad at him for going into the dungeon alone, and Vil was able to return with proof that he killed an evil guard, so he is awarded with 2 points of extra credit. Vil celebrates with his pet while Werkner does the paperwork ready, but as he does so, he asks Vil if he still hasn't given up on becoming a Magia Vander. In order to become one, Vil would first need to advance to a higher institute, and to do that he would need a total of 7,200 credits. Normally students would accumulate these credits in subjects like writing, practice, and spell work, but since Vil can't use magic, he will never earn any credits from still work. Vil is already aware of this, which is why you wanted to make up for it by doing extra work in practice, but Werkner has already explained to him that it is practically impossible to earn enough credits to pass through practice alone. Vil realizes his chances are slim, but he still wants to hold on to hope that he can fulfill his promise of becoming a Magia Vander. Any case, Werkner tells Vil that Magia Vander is a long way off and may not even graduate he doesn't start earning more credits. Werkner heard that Vil failed to earn any credits during his last exam, so unless he wants to flunk, he has to earn an additional 4 credits by the end of the week. Vil was shocked because that means he only has 2 days left before the deadline, so if no other options left, he begins searching his notes in hopes of finding a monster he can kill that is worth 4 credits. He is really desperate to find something, so while Werkner doesn't want to encourage Vil to go into the dungeon, he tells him about a Baskerville monster on the 6th floor of the dungeon, and Vil hasn't submitted that one yet, so he could get the required credits from killing it. Vil runs up to Werkner to hug him as thanks for all the help he has offered him, but Werkner tells him not to cling so tightly because he could put his job on the line. Unfortunately, Shounen happened to be outside Werkner's office during a whole conversation, so he knows that Vil is planning to go into the dungeon to slay Baskerville and is a true hater. He plans to head down there to kill it first so Vil won't be able to get enough credits to remain in the school. A while later, Vil arrives on the 6th floor of the dungeon, and he's in a pretty good mood since he's fought at Baskerville before, so it should be an easy win for him. His pet doesn't think it's a good idea for Vil to go into this with so much confidence, but Vil says there's nothing for him to worry about since as long as he is careful about the Baskerville's flame breath he won't get burnt to a crisp like last time, but in order to find the Baskerville, he is depending on Kiki to sniff it out. Meanwhile, Shounen and his friends are on their heading-ask mission to ensure that Vil drops out of the academy. His friends are equally hating on Vil, so they plan to kill the Baskerville first, and after that, they'll beat up Vil to send a message. They are all on board with the plan, but one of his friends asks if it is really safe for them to be this deep in the dungeon when only 3 of them here, but Shounen takes offense to the question, saying he is more than enough to keep all of them safe. The others let it go since they don't want to make Shounen mad, so Shounen keeps walking while continuing to internally hate on Vil. Instead, opinions someone who wasn't able to use magic shouldn't even dare to speak of the Magia Vanders, so the very sight of Vil offends him. Once they've gotten deep into the dungeon, Shounen turns around to brief his friends on what they need to do, but a second later, one of his friends gets punched so hard that he slams into a wall, and there's no way that dude survived this. Shounen remains calm as he faces the monster, but the other guy starts freaking the hell out. Vil hears the shrieks of the guy and he instantly realizes that someone must be in trouble, so he rushes over to help. He can't believe there are other people this deep in the dungeon, but from the sound he just heard they can't be too far away. As Vil arrives at the site of all the screaming, and he hides behind a wall and spots someone desperately shooting fireballs at the monster while pissing their pants. But none of his attacks are having any effect. That monster is an evil sentinel, and from what Vil knows is worth 10 points. Vil has never seen one in person before because the sentinel's habitat should be deeper down in the dungeon, so it makes no sense why it would come up to the 6th floor. More importantly, the person it is attacking is Shounen, and none of his spells are having any effect on the sentinel, so he doesn't stand a chance. The first thought that comes to Vil's mind is to go save Shounen, but then he takes a moment to think and comes to the conclusion. He's been hitting on him since day one, so why should Vil feel any obligation to save him now since no one would know? He just left him to die. He's about to close his eyes and pretend he was never here, but then he has a flashback to a time with Elfaria, when she told him that she liked how kind and brave Vil was, which is why she gave him a pair of goggles as a gift. Vil still have that same pair of goggles this day, and if he wants to continue being the same person Elfaria has always liked, he has to put his personal grudges aside and save Shounen, even if he's a bitch. As the sentinel was about to kill Shounen, Vil jumps in and blocks the strike with his sword. At the same time, back in the academy, Professor Edward comes running into Werkner's office to tell them that Shounen and his friends have all gone into the dungeon together without permission. He wants Werkner there to use his familiar to track them down before they get themselves killed, so Werkner grabs his bird and asks what for Shounen went to. Edward answers that they should be on the 6th floor, and as soon as Werkner hears that, he is relieved since that means Vil is with them, and as long as he is there he can handle any monster that attacks. He uses his crystal ball to show Edward what Vil is doing right now, and he's going toe-to-toe with the sentinel, and he is absolutely blitzing it. In the blink of an eye, Vil is already chopped off one of the sentinel's fingers, and when the sentinel tries to counterattack, He blocks the strike mid-air and backs up to create some space. Vil then dashes in once more and the sentinel can't keep up with him at all, so before it even realizes what's going on, Vil has already gotten on top of it and stabbed into his shoulder. Shounen can't believe what he's seeing since he never thought Vil would be this so strong. Even Edward is left in shock, so Werner explains to him that Vil is an amazing anomaly. He possesses superhuman strength that a mage could never hope to achieve. He has a body that's more durable than a Nokia phone and unbelievably accurate observational skills that allow him to grasp an enemy's strategy and form countermeasures for it after being attacked once, so as the sentinel tries to slash Vil again, he's able to perfectly predict the attack and dodge, while also slicing off the sentinel's arm in the process. Vil may not be able to use magic, however. He is more than capable of making up for it with his sword. As the sentinel rises in pain, Vil proceeds to grab the sentinel's sword with one hand and prepares to finish off once and for all. The sentinel fires off a plasma blast, has its last-ditch effort, but a single swing from Vil's sword is far more powerful, so Vil slices the sentinel in half, claiming his victory. Once it's all over, Vil walks over to Shounen, asked if he is okay, and Shounen still has a grudge against Vil, but Vil just saved his life, so he bites his tongue. However, even after witnessing that whole fight how capable Vil is, it doesn't stop Edward from hating one harder, since you won't stand for Magicless being stronger than students with magic. Edward leaves Werner's office in a rage, and while Werner is proud of Vil for saving Shounen, he is still mad at him for putting himself in danger. However, once again he managed to defeat the monsters, so Werner awards Vil with 10 points for killing the sentinel. The story continues. We see 5 years ago, Vil was the laughingstock of the whole school due to his lack of magic, and apparently the only reason he was allowed to enroll here in the first place was because he was friends with Elfaria, but since she had already become a Magia Vander at the time, there was no reason for the school to pretend to be nice to him anymore. Vil has had to endure all the ridicule this entire time, but hasn't stopped him from working hard to graduate regardless. Werner accompanied Vil to be evaluated by the headmistress, and she obviously had her doubts about whether Vil was cut out for the school or not, but once she hands him a sword and begins to test, Vil is able to counter each and every one of her fire spells within a fraction of a second. She's so impressed that she says Vil is allowed to stay at the school, and Werner's if it's surprised since he didn't think it would be this easy to convince her. It is true that Vil doesn't have any magic, but more importantly she thinks it'll be fun to have someone like Vil around. Vil asks the headmistress if he can be by Elfaria's side again if he becomes strong enough, and she tells him that he will have to work really hard and remain unfazed by the challenges along the way, but even then, there's no guarantee. But as Vil leaves, she remarks that it will be fun to see what Vil can accomplish. Back to the present, Vil is currently in Werner's class as he teaches everyone about the Tower of Magic. Climbing the tower means advancing to the upper institute to the topmost floor, where you will become a Magia Vander. As of now, there are currently 2 methods to becoming Magia Vander, and that's either to create a new type of magic or to earn over 7,000 credits in the school, but is pretty rare to invent new magic, so students usually focus on earning credits. However, since this is a remedial class, everyone in here is in danger of flunking out of school, especially Vil. After the classes are over, Colette meets up with Vil and asks how Vil is feeling since Werner's remedial classes are notoriously strict. Vil agrees that Werner is a strict teacher, but to be honest, he's glad Werner is kind enough to offer remedial classes in the first place, since most professors wouldn't bother to do so. As they are turning a corner, the animistic commotion going on, so they listen in and hear Shounen's friends glazing him for defeating the evil sentinel. You will question how he survived, but somehow by the time he woke up the only thing Moore saw was Shounen and a defeated evil sentinel, meaning Shounen had to have defeated it. Everyone believes Shounen is amazing for being able to kill a monster as powerful as an evil sentinel, but deep down, Shounen knows he's a fraud, since the one who actually defeated it was Vil. Just then he notices Vil walking by and he takes that as a personal insult, so he goes to Vil and starts picking a fight with him again. However, it's a lot harder for him to see Vil as inferior when he knows Vil could easily one-shot him right now. He's just choosing not to. He lets go Vil's jacket and begins walking away without saying a word. So once Shounen is gone, Colette asks Vil if something happened between the two of them, and something definitely happened. At the same time, Edward has just barged into Headmistress Cauldron's office and is demanding that Vil be expelled immediately. Cauldron asks why Edward suddenly wants to expel Vil out of the blue. He's already in his 6th and final year at the academy, so they can't just expel him without a reason. Edward tries to argue that Vil can't be allowed to stay at this school since he's a warrior not a mage, and he won't stand for someone who can't use magic trying to surpass it. Cauldron pulls out Vil's records and points out that Vil has outstanding scores in his writing and his magic reports are incredibly insightful, so aside from the fact that he can't use magic, he is the definition of a perfect student. If his dream were to become a Magia Vander, then he could easily excel at any other profession shows, and it is the Academy's duty to produce people of learning for the fated day. However, Edward states that the fact Vil wants to become a Magia Vander is the problem, and Cauldron can see Edward's points, so she proposes a solution. She tells Edward to go and personally test Vil, and Vil cannot pass Edward's test, then he's free to expel him if he wants. Edward asks if Cauldron is sure she wants to leave Vil's tests up to his #1 hater, and Cauldron says she's fine with it since it won't make a difference. If anything, she thinks it will be more entertaining to have the one known as the Dark Viper Mage test Vil. Back on Vil End is getting ready for his next class and asks Colette to help him open his locker for him. She happily does so, and he apologizes for having her do this for him all the time since he can't use magic. She says she doesn't mind, but then she notices Real Sword in his locker and asks him if he's still training with him. Vil says he is, but he couldn't get permission to use it while he's in school, and back in his dorm, his roommate wouldn't let him do anything dangerous. He and Colette later head to the library to study together, and Vil is taking it very seriously despite having already learned this topic before. Colette tells him to take it easy since he's already at the top of the class in writing, but Vil says he needs to keep studying his hardest since he can't afford to lose a single credit, and besides, he enjoys learning history from the perspectives of the other races. Especially since he can relate to the dwarves. They marched to war against powerful mages, but they never gave up in spite of the challenge. Just then, Colette notices that Vil has a white strand of hair on his head, and she says it's probably because he's overworking himself. She offers to pluck it out for Vil, and even though Vil says she doesn't need to, she still really wants to do it. However, in the middle of their flirting, Edward shows up behind Vil and tells him to come to the spell hall alone, because there is something he needs to do. A little while later, Vil arrives at the spell hall and Edward says that he will be offering Vil a special remedial class, so he should be grateful for it. Vil can't believe Edward would offer him a remedial class, but that still shows that he has no good intentions. He wants to see what Vil can really do, so he fires a warning shot to let Vil know that this is seriously tells him, and if he's able to successfully land a blow, then Edward will award him 5 spell work credits. Otherwise, if he fails, he will immediately be expelled. He also tells Vil that he's not allowed to refuse this test either, so he begins casting his spells takes Vil out. Meanwhile, Werkner has just been summoned to Cauldron's office, and she apologized for calling him here on such short notice, but she thought Werkner should be informed of what Edward is doing. She casts a spell to show him the test Edward is giving Vil, and she forbids Werkner from interfering for any reason. She believes it's only fair that Edward gets to have this request granted since Werkner got the same when he asked to watch over Vil. Still, Werkner thinks it is too cruel to let Edward of all people be the one to test Vil because he's a man who nearly became a Magia Vander. He may have failed, but he still possesses power that is equivalent to one, so Vil is in serious danger right now. So far Vil has been able to avoid getting hit by Edward's spells, but Edward has only been using low-level black magic so far, so Vil can't believe how much power Edward is producing. Vil has to fight back somehow, so he tries to run up behind Edward and landing kick, but Edward is easily able to block it with a shield spell. The shield is too strong for Vil to break it on arms, and Edward calls and hopeless for thinking he could get through a magic shield with a kick. Edward then blasts him away, and Vil is starting to worry that there may be no way for him to win, as Edward is simply too strong for him to beat as he is now. Edward tells Vil that he will limit himself to 2 spells, one to attack with fire and one defend himself from Vil's crude attacks. However, even if it is only one attack spell, one who has mastered that one spell can outclass someone who has learned 1000. Edward is simultaneously casting his fire spell, and Vil knows it will be bad news for him if he gets hit with that, so he starts running away, but Edward is still able to blast him regardless, and you can tell Edward is enjoying this because he looks like he's conducting a symphony of Vil's screams. Vil eventually falls to the ground, and he realizes there's no way for him to beat Edward like this, but if he had his sword, he could at least hold his ground against Edward. Outside the spell hall, Colette has been putting her things away in her locker, and she is really worried about Vil since Edward asking Vil to come alone for remedial classes couldn't have been a good sign. All of a sudden, Kiki came running up into the room, covered in Vil blood, and she was trying to get the Vil sword in his locker, so Colette realizes that something bad really happened to Vil and opens his locker, so they can go give him his sword. As Vil is lying on the ground, Edward is slowly walking towards him while saying that Vil could never hope to become a Magia Vander if he can't surpass him here. Magic has always reigned supreme even in the past. When dwarves went to war with images against an army of 10,000 dwarves, all it took was one mage to annihilate them all. The sword is never going to compare to the wand, but even if the odds are insurmountable, Vil still wants to become a Magia Vander, and he will do whatever it takes to achieve it. Edward can't understand why Vil would go to such lengths to become one, so he asks if Vil has some sort of noble goal that he wants to accomplish, so Vil tells him that he wants to be by the side of the girls he loves, but Edward thinks that's a stupid reason. It may seem ridiculous to Edward, but Vil made a promise to Elfaria, and no matter what it takes, he wants to be able to watch the sunset with her. Just then Coletta arrives at the spell hall and throws Vil's sword to him, and now that he's finally armed, Vil is able to counter Edward's fire spell. Edward is shocked that Vil was able to cut through the spell, but he realized this because Vil's sword is special. Even so, he still intends to prove that Vil is no match for a mage. Vil is terrified of Edward's flames, and if possible, he would have run away from this fight a long time ago, but facing Edward is the only way for Vil to move forward, so he charges at Edward while dodging all his attacks, and since he's finally close enough, he slices through Edward's barrier and successfully scratches Edward's cheek. Edward is forced to admit that Vil has passed the test, so he awards him his 5 credits and walks away. Vil collapses to the ground out of exhaustion, and Colette runs up to congratulate him on his victory, but he's totally passed out. Cauldron praises Vil's performance, and Werkner says his strategy of diving into the attack to close the distance and attack from a blind spot was brilliant, and what's even more impressive is that the sword strike was powerful enough to surpass Edward's shield, so Vil may have what it takes to become a Magia Vander after all. The story continues. In a flashback, we see the time Elfaria gifted Vil's a pair of goggles, and immediately after doing so she had to say goodbye since she was going to the top of the tower. However, as she was walking away, Vil called out to Elfaria and swore to her that he would find a way to climb the tower as well so they can be together, even if the odds are against him and he can't use magic. Vil swears that he will keep his promise and see the sunset with her someday. Elfaria was moved by Vil's speech, so she turned around with tears in her eyes and said she would wait for him as long as it takes, and as Elfaria finally left, Vil vowed that this would be the last time he ever cries or acts pathetic again. Back to the present, Vil is currently busy with his paper deliveries since he's got to work a lot of jobs to pay for his tuition. Well, on his usual route, he happens to run into Donnan and he greets him warmly, wishing Vil luck on his delivery route. He also says he will be visiting the tavern later today, so Vil tells him he will be waiting for him. As Vil runs off to finish off his deliveries, he ends up tripping on some steps and spilling the newspapers all over the place, but that is not a problem since with his speed, he's easily able to pick all the papers out of the air and avoid falling over. He happened to miss on newspaper, so he walks over to pick it up, but as he does so, he notices an article about Elfaria and how she's created yet another type of original magic. She's the first person to create 12 different original magic spells, and Vil is happy to see that she's still working hard up there, so she's going to work hard here as well. He's about to get moving again, but then he notices that there's another section in the article that says Elfaria has personally passed a request to the academy, and he totally freaks out over it. He immediately runs over to his dorm room and begins asking his roommate Rosti if he can help him make a magic item on short notice. Rosti asks what the huge rush is, so Vil tells him about the request Elfaria put in and he wants to be the one to handle it. He doesn't have any lessons today, so he's free to prioritize the requests and starts getting dressed. The job is to gather Frostwalker Ice cores since she apparently needs a lot of magic capitalists and all participating students are going to be compensated accordingly, so Vil just needs Rosti's magic items to help him. Rosti jokes that Vil is really straightforward his request, but he has no reason to refuse, so he hands Vil his new improved magic items, which Vil is very thankful for. Down on the 4th floor of the dungeon, Vil has just arrived to begin gathering ice cores, but there are already a ton of students here to do the same thing. Still, Vil expected as much since Elfaria is famous, so he is going to give it his all. However, just as he is about to start, a huge explosion rings out in the cave and it looks like it was caused by Shounen, who just blew up a bunch of Frostwalkers. His friends praise him for his display of skill, but internally, Shounen is agonizing over the fact that he is still nowhere near the level of strength Vil showcased that day. Vil sees Shounen. He is honestly impressed by the magic power he used, although he seems really angry about something. In any case, with all these students here, Vil will never get the chance to play any Frostwalkers. Of his only choice is to go deeper into the dungeon floor. As Vil descends, he ends up seeing a girl in danger, so he leaps into action and moments later, All 3 monsters have been sliced in half. The girl is shocked by what she just witnessed since this is the first time she's seen a magic student use the sword to fight. Vil asked her if she's alright, and after the initial shock has worn off, she says she's fine and introduces herself as Iris. We cut to a lecture with Werkner where he is talking about the great achievement of creating new magic. It is an accomplishment so grand that it warrants unconditional advancement up to the top of the magic tower, and new magic is usually named after the person who created it, or from words associated with them. For example, the dark magic spell Dax Darbicans that Edward used his name after a maze from ancient times called Fire Watchman Darbicans, so if any one of the students here manages to create new magic, they will be carving their names into history forever. A student raises their hand and asks Werkner if this means Elfaria is an amazing mage, and without a doubt Werkner believes that Elfaria is unbelievably good. Her magecraft is unheard of for a single mage to create 12 original spells by themselves, so in all the annals of his Troy she's one of the greatest mages to ever live. After hearing about Elfaria's accomplishments, Colette has to admit that she's every bit as amazing as Vil said she was, but her friend Rose starts teasing her from being jealous of Elfaria because she's in love with Vil. Colette gets embarrassed and yells at Rose for saying such ridiculous things, but that causes a disturbance in class, so Werkner turns around and tells her to sit down and be quiet. Meanwhile, down in the dungeon, Vil and Iris are walking along a passage, and after Vil had introduced himself to her, she recalls hearing about him since she was told about an upperclassman who couldn't use magic, nicknamed the Unprecedented No Talent. Vil is shocked to hear that people actually call him that, but he also notices that Iris referred to him an upperclassman, so she explains that she's only 14, meaning she's 2 years below Vil right now. That makes her 4th-year student. But Vil has something that he's curious about, so he asks her if she doesn't feel any disdain towards him due to his lax magic, but Iris doesn't see why she should dislike Vil for something like that, especially when he saved her a few minutes ago. Even if he can't use magic, she's a heartful respect for people who have their own special talents. Vil gets a bit flustered, so he changes the subject and asks Iris if she's here because of Elfaria's request, and Iris confirms it, saying she wants to be of use to the Magia Vander, and someday she hopes to become one of the people to hold up the sky, and she isn't speaking metaphorically. By the way, in this world, people aren't able to see the real sky because the world is hidden. The tremendous energies of the Magia Vander cover everything and create a false sky known as the Great Barrier, and according to the legends, when the Great Barrier falls, the world will once again be enveloped in darkness and a great calamity will begin. That's why students are motivated to fulfill the requests of the Magia Vander, not just because they admire them, but also because they believe it will help support their mission to hold the sky up. Iris mentions that she's actually had the honor of meeting Elfaria person before, and Vil is surprised, so she starts telling him how it happened. She was cornered in the dungeon one day, and as her life had begun to flash before her eyes, she saw no way out. However, before she could be devoured, a burger wall of ice encased all the monsters that were attacking her, and she turned around to find Elfaria standing there and asking if she was alright. It was an experience she will never forget, which is why she wants to do everything that she can help Elfaria. However, she knows she can to get the Frostwalker course. She hasn't been able to find a single one, and her search spell isn't picking up anything either, so she assumed that other students must have defeated them all. But Vil doesn't think that's the case. He shows Iris an ice fragment that Frostwalkers leave behind when they move, and it's normally supposed to be around millimeter, but this one is huge. That can only mean that there must be a powerful Frostwalker nearby, probably somewhere that Iris's search spell can't detect. Iris asked Vil how he could possibly know all this when he can't use magic, so he explains that he studies magic because he thinks it is amazing, but it's not almighty, especially down the side of place like the dungeon, so he who lacks magic has to use all his knowledge, wisdom, and experience to make up for it. Iris asks what Vil means by experience, and seeing as they are standing in a large open room, Vil's experience tells him that there is about to be a boss battle. As the Frostwalker tries to seek attack them, Vil dashes forward to get Iris safety, and as she finally realizes what's going on, she identifies the monster as a Frost Rex. A Frost Rex is the highest form of Frostwalker, and it's worth 6 credits on its own, so it's basically the special boss monster of the 4th floor. The Frost Rex fires an ice laser towards them, so Vil jumps out of the way to avoid being frozen to death. He says Iris down and asks her to stay back while he handles the Frost Rex, but Iris warns him that physical attacks won't work against the Rex, as anything it touches will instantly be frozen. For that reason, close combat has been completely ruled out as an option, and it is generally believed that the only way to deal with it is with long-range magic attacks, but Vil isn't worried as he has a plan in mind to deal with the Rex. As it begins charging up another laser blast, Vil prepares the magic item he got from Rosti and charges forward at it. He evades the ice beam and lands behind the Rex before sliding underneath. The Rex can't keep track of Vil, so it begins firing in random directions, and while it's not paying attention, Vil uses the magic item to latch onto its body before dashing around the road to entangle it. Before long he has completely ensnared the Rex in wires, and Vil states that the main weaknesses of Frost Rex are fire magic and explosive attacks. So as the Frost Rex is about to fire another blast at him, Vil activates the magic item and causes the wire to ignite, leave all the way back to the bombs that were attacked to the hook and causing a huge explosion. The Frost Rex is reduced to a pile of rubble, so Vil retracts the tool and makes a mental note to thank Rosti for his help later. Iris is stunned at what she just saw, but then her true personality comes out and she remarks that Vil is far stronger than the rumors had led her to believe. She wonders how she should report her findings, but while she's thinking, Vil gets her attention and tells her they got on really good ice course so they can head back now, and Iris smiles in agreement to maintain her persona and avoid suspicion. A while later, Iris heads to the Wizard Tower, and as she's walking along the halls and taking off her disguise, she goes over what she learned from following Vil. He truly can't use magic, but he compensates for it in creative ways. That, along with his insane battle sense and experience, means that while he's not qualified to be a mage, he is an incredibly talented warrior. As she reaches the end of the hallway, she walks up to a huge door and opens it to meet with the Magia Vanders. She asks them for a moment of their time and apologizes if she is interrupting something important, but Carriot tells her that there's no need to apologize since they were just having a boring meeting for the sake of it, but the situation is still dire since if the sky barrier were to be breached now, the world would certainly be destroyed. The celestial host has been watching them from beyond the sky would overwhelm them instantly with the number of mages they have now, so they need to hurry and find more promising mages to aid the fight to come on that fated day, otherwise the calamity and the lore will come to pass, and they can't allow that to happen. They ask Iris have her observation mission when and if she happened to find anyone useful, and she confirms that she managed to find a promising person who could be useful to their cause. The no talent who can't use magic, Vil Serfort, and she recommends that he be inducted into the tower. Carriot and Eleanor are against the idea, but Zio thinks it could be fun, while Elfaria chooses to reserve her opinion on the matter. Zio honestly doesn't care who it is as long as they are useful, but Eleanor thinks it would be crazy to bring a magicless person here. They're about to start a fight over it, but Carriot calms them down and says they don't need to make a decision now as the Grand Magic Festival will be occurring soon, and they can just use those results to decide. The usual ones will naturally end up in the top positions, so Vil doesn't make it that he wasn't cut out for the tower. With that, they called the meeting to a close and all teleport themselves out, and with Elfaria being the only one left, she's happy to know Vil is still trying to keep his promise, so she says she will be waiting for him as long as it takes. That brings the episode to an end. Thanks for watching. Want next part? Subscribe the channel and turn on notification bell.